But all of that, what about what I call at age 75, my final gig? And the final gig, Federation of Motoring Clubs. That's where my heart is, where my energies are, and what I want to talk about for the rest of tonight, because I want to go into a bit of detail about what we're working on. I'll just tell you how I got involved, because this is an important piece of the puzzle, I think. In about 2021, I think, as president of the Canterbury Mustang Owners Club, I saw an article that the Federation had, I think it was on the last page of Classic Driver. Roy Hughes had written it somewhere about emissions or fuel supply or something. And I saw on the bottom, Federation of Motoring Clubs. I'd never heard of it. And I thought I'd been around a little bit, I might have, but anyway. I did a web search, the web, saw who the Federation was. I see Bruce is here somewhere. I saw that the Bay of Plenty Mustang Owners Club, the Auckland Mustang Owners Club, the Waikato Mustang, they were all members of the Federation. Canterbury wasn't. So anyway, I went to our committee, said, guys, we should join up to this. We should be part of it. So we sent in our application form, and that all went through. 2 days later, I got a phone call from Harry Deinhoven, who many of you will know that at that stage, the president of the Federation, and still on the executive of the Federation. He said, hey, Gary, thanks to the Canterbury Mustang Owners Club. I see you've joined up, etc., etc. Great to have you on board. I said, that's fine, Harry. I had to do it. Should have done it long ago. But anyway, we've done it. He said, no, that's not what I want to talk about. He said, I've checked your CV, or I've looked at you on Google, whatever he'd done. He said, I think we'd like you on the executive. And he said, would you be happy, as well as just joining the Federation, can you give your time to be an advisor, like a ring-in, onto the executive committee of the Federation? I said, sure, Harry. I mean, I had time to do it and all the rest of it. I said, I'd be honoured to do it, blown away to do it. So that's how I got involved. And we'll talk a bit more about that maybe in a moment. So I've told you that story just to give you a little bit of background, I guess, about some of the business challenges, the issues, the opportunities that I've had to work on. And I now want to talk a little bit now about the Federation itself. So let's go into the next piece of this. I think there's a heading slide there. Okay. A little bit of background to start with, and again, forgive me if this goes over old ground for many of you, but I want to sort of set the scene of the Federation as I see it today. And all cards on the table, this is a personal opinion. This is not a presentation that's been endorsed by the executive. In fact, 2 members of the executive in the room tonight, at least 2, are seeing this for the first time. But I just want to set the scene, so we're all on the same page. The Federation itself, if you don't already know, was founded in 1994 in a meeting late that year, held in Taupo, coordinated by the VCC to bring the parties together. And they were about 31, I think, car clubs, primarily from around the North Island, who came together to talk about where we're at, where we're going, the challenges around us, and do we need some form of, for want of a better word, parent group. And they were calling on some UK experience that they were aware of at that time, particularly through the research that the VCC had done. So the end result of that was an agreement was formed out of a working group. It was endorsed in the early stages of 1995 that the Federation, the New Zealand Federation of Motoring Clubs, and that's where the name was set at that point. There are other alternatives, but that's the name they settled on, would be set up. Today, as you see there, the present membership is 150 specific clubs, accounting for nearly 149,000 members. In that number of 150, the VCC is one club. It doesn't include branch by branch. It's the VCC is one of the 150. The New Zealand Hot Rod Association, who were also involved back in '94 in the setup of this, is one club. even though it's got 118 subsidiary hot rod and custom clubs. The NZHRA is one club. The MCA, Motorhome and Caravan Association, who joined in 2010, is one club. So the other 147 are all the other clubs that we're all involved with all around the country. The whole model of the Federation is voluntary. And so everything that you're hearing tonight, everything we do is all done on a voluntary basis for all the good that that brings, because it brings us fresh eyes and grassroots thinking and all the rest of it. But it has the downsides in the sense that we have no budget to actually bring in expertise or experts that we actually might have to pay for. So voluntary is a key piece of it. In my personal view, and I'm stressing this here, the Federation, I think over the years as I look at it, and I look at really in many ways where we're at today, the best word I could come up with is we're a pretty static organisation. Not everyone's heard of us, most of them in the room have, but not that many outside of the room really know what the Federation does or who it is or whatever. Even over that 30 years, there's only ever been 7 presidents. In 14 of those 30 years, there were only 2 presidents. One did 7 years, another did 7 years. So there's a level, and this is not to be critical. It's just a statement of the reality of who we are today. There hasn't been a lot of, for want of a better word, fresh blood. The AGMs of the Federation have never had an election where if we've got 6 executive positions, we've got 8 names and we've got to pick the 6 out of the 8. It's only ever been at every AGM that I can track down, I've gone back at least to 2011, the number of nominations for the 6 positions have been exactly 6. There's never been a competitive election out of 2 people who want to be president. So there's a sort of a static, or whatever the right words are, flavour to who we are. We've only had 2 secretaries, Chris Butler today, doing a great job, and before him, Roy Hughes, but the 2 of them have owned, if that's the right word, have been in that position since 2010. 15 years, nearly 15 years. We don't have the funding. As an organisation, we've somehow set ourselves up in such a way that we draw in the income we do through the annual subs, which is basically covering our basic costs, and there's nothing left over to do something different. Now, we built up a little bit of money over time, which we then invested into the survey, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But even right now, and David, where's David sitting in the room? David's in the back. David Raven is the Vice President of the Federation. David, I should have introduced you, and Bruce Lewis up here. But David is our Vice President and our Treasurer. And David will tell you, if I don't, we just don't have a lot of money to spend on doing stuff. I'm here tonight at my own cost because the Federation hasn't got $1,000 to spend on an air ticket and airport parking, Christchurch to Tauranga and back. And that's fine, but that's who we are. That's why I say we're a little caught in this little jam, if that's the right word. As I talk about these early days of the Federation, I also just on the part from a VCC Bay of Plenty viewpoint, Don, want to make special mention on from a Federation viewpoint to yourselves as Bay of Plenty, but also have we got Taupo representatives here? I believe we have. I also want to pay special mention to the role that Norm Poynton has played in these early years of the Federation, because there is no doubt that whilst I'm being a little direct in some of my comments, there's been some really great people who've put their heart and soul and energy into where we are today, and Norm was one of them. And I just want to say thank you, and we recognise that. Okay, so let's go then to the next slide. Because if all of that, and I don't want it to sound overly negative, but I'm trying to be honest because I'm trying to take you on, again, a journey here. The other issue that's going on here is what is going on in other spheres around us. What are the other influences or the issues going on? Because we live, as we all know, in times of change and challenge. And am I right? The speed of that change and challenge, or the rate of change and challenge, seems to be speeding up, one man's opinion. Carbon footprint, climate change, environmental pressures. These are in no special order. Government attitudes, policies, responsiveness, responsibilities, all of that whole area of what's happening in government and where do they sit, and with regard to whatever we're talking about, or even other wider issues. What I sense is increasing frustration, maybe due to specific issues that are going on with regard to compliance, certification, regulations, and so on. Trade sector pressures. Many of you will be well connected into the trades, whether it's automotive mechanicking, servicing, engineering, particularly from a vintage viewpoint, in terms of machining parts, wooden wheels, whatever. The experts, the numbers are reducing, and there's no real plan bringing new people through. I know George Keir, as the president of the VCC, is very much on the same page. George and I should add in here, in our collective roles. He is president of the VCC. Myself as president of the Federation. We're both Christchurch, if you like, or Canterbury based. We spend a lot of time talking. We're on the same page. We share a lot of stuff, even on a one-on-one basis as we're bouncing ideas around. And I know George is very much on the same page as well when it comes to the trade sector. I didn't know how to write these next words, but the whole issue of the fact that, I won't use the word age, all I'll say is none of us are getting any younger. Intentions across society are changing, the realities are changing. We live in a world of social change, and to me, that seems to be speeding up, particularly when you then factor in generation, X, Y, and Z and their attitudes and where things are going. Who knows? Increasing commercial interests in players, I sense. I've never heard it officially from anyone, but I see the big players, and again, I'm not picking on them, but the Americanas of this world, the beach hops, so on. Good luck to them. Don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-business. Good luck to them. But it's changing the game plan a little of the events the rest of us have to run, because you will have members in your club, like we have in our club in Canterbury, who go on a run of ours. It's all a bit average and whatever it might be, but suddenly they're away on beach hop or Americana, and the photos are coming in every 3 hours, and they're loving the hype and all the rest of it. Some of the commercial operators are setting a standard that we shouldn't ignore, I don't think. And there's other issues. I mean, I haven't tried to put them all here. The whole issue of club membership. I know as a federation, we lost a club last week or 10 days ago who got to the point where they said it's just not worth carrying on. Our membership is declining and whatever, and we've decided we're pulling out of the federation. Yes, it was a smaller club, but it's the reality of the pressures that are out there. The other whole issue, which I haven't put on screen, the whole complications around health and safety and traffic management, and what that now means if you're running a full scale or a reasonably big event. What you have to spend today in traffic management and all the other hoops you've got to jump for, we didn't do 5 years ago. Another complication. But the interesting thing, and I wanted to put it up there, is that coming out of the survey and coming out of what we see on the streets, the public at large actually still seems to be at least as enthusiastic about what we do, if not more enthusiastic. So that's a good sign. So I don't want this whole thing to be negative. All of the stuff we've just talked about, we put into the 2-day workshop that as a Federation executive we did last November, just on a year ago, and I'll come to that in a moment. Okay, the survey itself, I'm not going to talk about this in great detail tonight. It's been out there. Let's go straight into the next slide. Just a couple of touch points I want to, I guess, hit on here. The survey itself, and those who are aware of it or may not be aware of it, it started actually way back in 2019, and then it all sort of got put on hold through COVID and so on. The project team, which was Michael Anderson, Chris Dyer, many of you will know Chris through his Model T and Model A associations, and myself, we were the three on that team. We kicked off pretty much in June 2022 to get the survey underway. In round terms, and our Chief Financial Officer is at the back of the room, and he'll tell me if I get this wrong, but it was basically a $55,000 project for a federation that didn't have a lot of money. But we bit the bullet and said, right, this is important to do it. It's important to do it right. So let's dig deep and see what we can achieve. So in the end, what we did is we funded basically what you see, the $55,000 there. We funded 42,000 of that from a whole group of what we call gold sponsors. In there was the Federation itself at $5,000, the VCC at $5,000, the NZHRA at $5,000, the MCA, Motorhome and Caravan Association, at $5,000. Those three groups, all by the way, were contacted by phone call by myself. They all made the decision within 24 hours and with full support, which was great. There were a number of other private sponsors that we got on board. Some of them were in the form of clubs as well. That all added up to 42. We then went out to all of the clubs across New Zealand and said, look, this is what we're doing. We think it's important. We're close, but not quite there. As a club, would you like to dig in? Would you like to make a donation? Your call. Could be 50, could be whatever. And out of that, we got, in fact, 41 clubs who collectively put in the balance of the 55, which I think was $13,000 odd, 14 maybe, across 41 clubs. So that's how we got it together. We got it up and running. The point I want to make here in terms of all of the work that went into it, you've seen the final report. If you've gone online, you might have sifted through 150 pages of the full report. I just want to make the plug, and I don't need to do this, but I think it's, from a Federation viewpoint, it's important that I share the story. We had the best research company in New Zealand do that job. If there's ever any discussion around your clubs or you hear it socially or whatever, you know, why did you use those guys? Someone else could have done it better or whatever. They are one of New Zealand's top-rated research companies. The owner of the company, Colin Yee, has been working in automotive research since 1989. And the guy, Duncan Stewart, who actually did all the hard yards, is not only one of New Zealand's highest accredited personal researchers in terms of his academic and experience qualities, but he's a petrol head. He and I would, and Michael Anderson, would be sitting with Duncan as we're talking about a particular survey or a sector of the survey we wanted to do, whether it was Hot Rod Association, custom and hot rods, or we might be talking about vintage motorcycles. Duncan had a knowledge of those sectors. He knew brands, he knew people who've got them, he had stories, he had petrol in his veins, so they did a great job. As you see there, 15,500 surveys. I've heard people say, well, hang on, Gary, you've got 140,000 members, why only 15,000? You cannot survey 140,000 people in any which way today. You won't get a different answer because 15,500 is more than statistically valid. And secondly, if you tried to survey 140,000 people, you'd go broke very quickly. And so all I want to say to you is assure you in terms of the background of the survey, totally statistically valid. And if you think about the fact that in that 15,500 and all those surveys that are in there, we covered 6 different sectors across, whether it be historics, classic cars, vintage machinery, motorbikes, hot rod customs, etc. And we covered across a number of other groups like trades, private collections, museums. They all had different questionnaires. And each of those questionnaires, in some cases, had 50, or you all filled, many of you will have filled out the questions. You know how it went on and on and on. There were something like 50 or 55 questions on average in those surveys. Some were less, some were more. If you imagine that amount of data with that complexity on a spreadsheet, you wouldn't fit the spreadsheet in this room. And that's what Duncan did and managed to get to the conclusions that are in there. So that's me, I guess, just giving you an inside view of the survey itself and the depth. Preliminary results in September last year, we all saw those. Final report in February of 2024. And I'll leave it at that point. The key headlines in here, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through every one of these one by one. The headlines, obviously, that caught the attention was the 16.5 billion economic footprint. Come back to that in a moment. Through the fact that we only drive 3,700 kilometres per year per vehicle on average, we confirmed, we're not a major contributor to carbon emissions. To me, wider than just the sector and the people in our sector, to me, 2 of the big conclusions that the survey gave us that we would never have had otherwise: 71% of the population at large in New Zealand support who we are as historic and classic vehicle owners, what we do as owners and as clubs, and the heritage that we represent. 71% of the population at large. And there was no lead into that question. There was nothing that shaped their thinking one way or another. That's a genuine number. Higher than, quite frankly, we thought it might be. And then in the other exercise that Duncan created, where he got them thinking about, if you could therefore have one of these vehicles, a classic or historic car, and he gave them options on 19 different cars, from a Model T to a whatever, a Jaguar or whatever, over the years and over the different model ranges and sectors. On average, 26% of the same New Zealanders said, yep, I would love to have that vehicle, whatever their vehicle of choice was, in my garage, if I could do it. If circumstances were right, I would love to have that vehicle. 26% is the average. On some vehicles, it was up as high as 45. On some vehicles, it was as low as 15. But nothing scored 0. And the average across all of those 19 vehicles was 26%. They'd love to have it in their garage. So the market's not dead yet. That's the point I will make out of that. Okay, the final report. That's the big report. It's online. It's on the Federation website. No one will have ever or wanted to download a hard copy. I've only done it so I can stand here and show you what 150 pages looks like. It is immensely full of detail. And it really backs up the whole effort that we collectively, across our clubs, have gone to. I talked a moment ago about the mechanics of pulling all of that together. I won't go back into that in more detail. The point I just do want to touch on is the 16.5 billion. Can you just go back to that earlier slide? That's the one on the top right there. I just want to make mention of that because no one's ever invented that number before. As Michael and I were sitting with Duncan and Colin Yee, the researchers, and they had all this data coming in, I was looking at it, I guess thinking about it, of how as president we were going to communicate this to ministers, the Mike Hoskings of this world and so on. And I said, we need a number that grabs everyone's attention. And they said, well, how are you going to do that, Garry? Whatever. Because when you looked at the individual numbers, they're all over the place. There's whatever it was. There's money in there that people spend on an annual basis on their car. There's money that that clubs spend and so on. But I wanted a figure that somehow grabbed everyone's attention. So we invented a new concept. I'm just telling you this now, so there's total honesty and transparency. This isn't GDP in the sense of a pure economic viewpoint. When you read about New Zealand's GDP is going up, going down, or whatever it is, that's sort of like the total level of transactions and everything else that's going on. And we've got that in there, but we've got more. We wanted to get to a number which actually said, in simple layperson terms, what do we, as the historic and classic vehicle movement, represent in this country? What's the dollar figure we actually account for? And so the researcher guy said, well, actually, how are you going to do this, Garry? Because we can't find an economist who can do this. I said, let's get creative. Let's take all the money that we all spend, not just within the Federation, but extrapolate across all historic and classic owners across New Zealand. We'll take all the money we spend on our vehicles in a year. So that's pretty clear. We take all the money that the public at large spend on going to museums and car shows, whatever, because we had that number. Let's take all the money that the tradespeople are paying their employees in terms of salaries and stuff as best we could get to that. The trade survey still needs a bit of next time round we'll have a bit more refinement to it, but we got an idea of what the salaries are across the trade sector. But then we went one stage further and we said, well, hang on a minute, that's just the money we spend on an average year basis. But we as a sector are more than that, because we've got this investment sitting in the garage or in the workshop or in the collection. And that's money we've got tied up in these vehicles, not spent somewhere else. So we added that in to get to what we call the total economic footprint that we have on the ground in the country. And that's where the 16.5 came from. So no one's queried it. No one's come back and said, Garry, where in the economic textbook do I find the definition of economic footprint? Because basically we created it. It's a legitimate number because we know the individual numbers are absolutely legitimate. We just added them together to say that's what we represent. So that's where that came from. I think that's probably all I'll cover on that right now. If there's other questions on the survey, happy to take them a bit later. We won't be far away now, another 5 minutes. Is that all right? Yep. I won't go past 9. All right? Promise. No. Okay. Well. Okay, do you want to get into something interesting? Should we talk about, next slide? Okay. This is where it gets tougher. In terms of the government, much of this I won't go through this in great detail. We as a federation, I guess, coming into office, I guess, after the AGM of 2023, I stepped into the role after Harry in whatever that was, June or July of last year. We had the elections in September. So the first thing we did was get off the mark quickly, and we communicated as Federation directly with the preliminary survey results, the September results, with Simeon Brown, Matt Ducey. Matt Ducey is the Associate Minister of Transport, and with Paul Goldsmith, the Minister of Heritage. We then updated that communication with another round of communications with the final survey result, when the 16.5 came out and so on. We did that all again with the same ministers, but this time we included Chris Luxon. You remember the photos of the Mini from memory, am I right, David? That was Pakuranga, wasn't it? Yeah. Britain Euro show at Pakuranga, where Chris Luxon declared that he's a classic and historic car fan. So he said, right, you're on our list. got a lovely reply back from them, by the way, directly from the PM, to put them in the picture about the Federation, the updated numbers, 16.5 billion and so on. We also copied that note to David Seymour, who is the coalition leader, as you know, and Minister of Regulation, or in his words, I think, deregulation. He's occupied on other issues at the moment. Harry and David, I couldn't make it, met with Simeon Brown, Minister of Transport in Auckland on April the 17th, and we presented the warrant of fitness proposal from the Federation, brand new proposal. We basically ripped up all the stuff that we'd been talking about with the NZTA for the last 3 to 4 years, because they told us that would never fly. They weren't interested in it anymore. So we said, okay, park that up. Here's the new proposal, which was for 12-month warrants on all vehicles in New Zealand 40 years and older, and vehicles older than 1919, 0 warrants. We put into that a huge amount of work on analysis of the risk factor, particularly around crash statistics and fatality risk, fatality and serious injury, and warrant of fitness performance in terms of how those cars perform going through warrants today, across versus all other cars. So we put all of that proposal together. Harry and I presented that to the Director of Land Transport, Brent Alderton, and his deputy, Mike Hargraves, in late May. We got given an indication that they thought it was a serious proposal. They complimented us on the amount of detail, the amount of work we'd put into it, promised us an early response as best they could. Now, in fairness, NZTA have a few issues on their plates right now. We're not the only ones. And they promised an early response maybe around August, September. We followed up with them in August to see whether or not they were on track. We got indicated then, no, they were running behind time. It would be late October. I then followed up with Mike Hargraves, who's the deputy director, who is the one making the decision. And he indicated to me that, I followed up with him on November the 1st, which is 10 days ago, and said, October 31 has come and passed. What's happening, Mike? And he came straight back to me and said, Gary, we're close. I will call you next Friday. That's Friday of last week. So, got the call. Expected to be here tonight and be able to share with you a decision. And what I've been told, and what the Federation, if you like, has been told, not me personally, is that he has made his preliminary decision on that proposal. The preliminary decision is now being reviewed as it needs to be by, I guess, the other higher echelons or whatever it is within NZTA, and he will be back to me with the decision this week. So here I am on Monday night. I don't have a decision. I'm being absolutely honest and upfront and transparent with you. We'll get that decision sometime this week, and we'll communicate it when we get it. I don't know what it will be. I can't say this meeting's off the record because you can't control everything, and I mean, we're all free to tell whoever, but all I will say to you is that 3 or 4 months ago, we were pretty confident that we'd presented a pretty good case, and the feedback we got was, hey, you guys have done a great job. You've given us more data than we ever expected. You've answered a lot of our questions around whatever about the potential issues. But now I'm not quite so confident, is probably what I'll say to you. I won't try and pre-read what it's going to be. I suspect we might have some more work to do. Don't know. All I will say is that there's 2 things I guess I want to point out. What I guess we've come to understand, I personally have come to understand, Harry was probably a little further advanced than I was, is that the whole business culture of NZTA is risk averse. It is all about managing risk. And that's basically an outcome of an event that happened in 2019, where NZTA were taken to task by a coroner. That coroner's report got a whole lot of attention in the media. It resulted in massive changes within the NZTA leadership group, but both the directors, the chair, and senior management. And it led to some changes within cabinet, Jacinda Ardern's cabinet, because this coroner's report basically said NZTA had failed in their duty to manage risk that had resulted in a particular fatality in some form of workplace accident involving a vehicle. So where I understand it is this attitude of risk aversion is now paramount within the NZTA. Now, we still believe our data showed there is no risk. We compared the accident and the fatality and serious injury accidents of vehicles 40 years and older, whether they be a classic or historic car or a darned daily driver that someone's still driving, because they're all in that sector, 40 years and older. The fatality and serious injury risk in that sector over the last 20 years is infinitesimal. 2 or 3 accidents, or whatever the number was, it was of that scale in that 20-year period, compared to whatever goes on in all the other sectors. We analysed the warrant of fitness data, and you're not going to believe this, but the pass rate on first check for a 40-year-old plus vehicle in the warrant of fitness testing is it's equal to vehicles that are in 10 years and younger, and 3 of those years are no warrants. And the warrant of fitness failure rate in those 40-year and older vehicles is twice as low, whatever the right words are, than vehicles which are 10 to 20 years or 20 to 30 or 30 to 40. So there is no risk from a warrant of fitness risk viewpoint. In our view, the data shows it. There's no risk from a fatality and serious injury viewpoint. The data showed it. But still, I'm worried they're being risk averse. So I won't say any more, but we're just going to live with it for another 3 or 4 days and see what comes out. That's where we're at on that. I think that probably covers everything I can cover on that. There is Plan B, the 40-year warrant thing. We called internally Plan A. We didn't call it Plan A at the time, but when we started getting a bit nervous, I called it Plan A, because we then started, a couple of us, brainstorming Plan B. All I can say is, if Plan A doesn't work, Bruce, David, right, we're going to go for Plan B, whatever that looks like. We'll see how that works out.